So I'm going to back up here. All right. You don't need a course in physics to pound a nail with a hammer, and you don't need a course in genetics to apply DNA to your family tree. You only need to understand a few basic facts about the different types of DNA and how they pass down the family tree. And we will cover those in this high-level overview. As Jane said, I got into this because DNA testing solved my personal mystery. 15 years ago, I was an accidental pioneer, the first known case of an adoptee identifying birth family through genetic genealogy. My biological parents are shown here, and you may have read the book I wrote, Finding Family, My Search for Roots and the Secrets in My DNA. I also have a presentation that summarizes my search and gets into adoptee searches in general and surprise DNA matches. Here's what we're going to cover. I'll start with the key things you can accomplish with genetic genealogy. I'll introduce you to the key functions of genetic genealogy, 3 test types and 5 testing companies, explain how to order and collect your sample, show you some sample results, and go over the key factors that will impact your results. And then I will do some testing company comparisons, give you some examples of my favorite testing company tools, examples of some third-party tools, and then leave you with some educational resources where you can learn more on your own. Whether you're a genealogist or an adoptee, the first function of genetic genealogy is to find previously unknown relatives. The testing company will compare your DNA with everyone else who has already taken the same test and will continue to compare you with new people who take the test for years to come. So you will get a changing list of people who share significant amounts of DNA with you. And all but the most speculative matches must share a common ancestor. Some of your matches will have online family trees. You can also contact matches to begin a dialogue. Either way, you will learn something new about your family tree. The second function of genetic genealogy is to measure how much DNA 2 people have in common. This can confirm or disprove a suspected relationship out to the second cousin level and sometimes further out. Obviously, this function is especially critical for adoptees who believe they have found a close biological relative. But other questions can be answered. Are 2 people full siblings or half siblings? Are twins identical or fraternal? And is the man who raised me really my biological father? The third function is to learn what mix of ethnicities we inherited from our ancestors. This science is new and evolving. The key word to remember is estimate. There are many reasons why such reports may not match your expectations. I have an entire presentation devoted to that subject, which I will share with you later today. The fourth function is to determine your ancient ancestry through something called haplogroups in your direct paternal and maternal lines. Note that some of these tests offer optional reports on physical traits and genetic health. That's outside the scope of genealogy, so it's not on this list. There are 3 major DNA test types: Y chromosome testing, mitochondrial DNA testing, and autosomal DNA testing. There are 5 major DNA testing companies, and I have listed them in the first column: Family Tree DNA, Ancestry.com, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and Living DNA. The next 3 columns are the 3 test types. As you can see, Family Tree DNA offers all 3 test types, and their autosomal test is called Family Finder. The other companies only do autosomal DNA testing, which is the most widely used test today. The Y-DNA test traces paternal ancestry through your father's father's father and so on. Only men have a Y chromosome to test, but women can test a suitable male relative, such as your brother, your father's brother, or a son of your father's brother. And by selecting suitable test subjects, you can explore many paternal lines in your family tree. Family tree DNA is the obvious choice for Y-DNA testing, and this test has different testing levels. You can start at one level and decide to upgrade later if you wish. Testing more markers does not generally produce more matches, but added markers can show you which matches are really the closest. I have an entire presentation on Y-DNA testing tips and techniques. In fact, I just recorded this week for the Southern California Genealogical Society. They have an annual jamboree that's going to be held in August. And if you register for that online program, you will be able to see that presentation and dozens more on genealogy and genetic genealogy. We all inherit mitochondrial DNA from our mothers, but only women pass it on. So this test can help you trace and confirm maternal lines. Now, I describe these first two test types as narrow and deep. They are narrow because each traces just a single line through your family tree. And they are deep because the common ancestors responsible for your matches may be recent or may have lived hundreds or even thousands of years ago. Family Tree DNA is the only major DNA testing company still offering mitochondrial DNA testing. In the old days, you ordered tests that only sampled parts of your mitochondrial DNA, but the cost of testing 100% of your mitochondrial DNA has dropped dramatically. So today, your only option is the MT full sequence test. It's the gold standard for mitochondrial DNA, and you can't do any better. Unlike the first two tests that I described as narrow and deep, autosomal DNA testing is wide but shallow. It's wide because it can uncover cousins from any branch of your family tree. But it's shallow because it can only go back consistently about 5 to 7 generations. That's because autosomal DNA is a mix inherited from both parents. The amount of DNA from your ancestors gets cut in half after every generation. So eventually, the DNA from any particular ancestor becomes undetectable. There are many companies offering autosomal DNA tests today, but experts only recommend 5. The Family Finder test at Family Tree DNA, Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage DNA, and Living DNA. Any other test, frankly, is a waste of money. No matter which test or company you choose, the process for testing your DNA is basically the same. You order your test online from the testing company's website using a debit or a credit card. They mail you a test kit. You return your sample by mail. They email you when your results are ready. Then you log into your private account with a password, and no reports are typically sent by postal mail. So how do you provide a sample of your DNA? Well, standardized test kits let each lab run hundreds of samples at a time using barcodes and automated equipment. And that's the secret to the dramatic reduction in cost. There are 2 sampling methods. You either spit saliva into a tube or rub inside your cheeks with a little swab. You can see here which companies use which method. The method usually doesn't matter unless the subject cannot easily spit saliva into a tube. Here are 4 examples where cheek swabs work better. And I'm serious about the last one. Many funeral directors will collect a sample for you if you have a swab test kit on hand. So what do you get from a genetic genealogy DNA test? You can learn many things, but I'm going to start with what's most important. Using the Family Finder Autosomal DNA test as an example, here's the key report you get from each test. It's a list of other users who share DNA with you. I've covered the names for privacy. The default order lists them in descending order of how much DNA they share. As you can see from the column called Relationship Range, the list includes a projection of how you may be related. Since different relationships share similar amounts of DNA, there is more than one possibility shown. Here I have assigned the correct relationships to the ones I know for sure. You will get other reports too, but your list of genetic matches is the most important finding. I will cover some other reports later. For autosomal DNA tests, the amount of shared DNA is measured in a unit called centimorgans. The scientific explanation of a centimorgan would make your head swim. Just remember this: the more centimorgans you and a DNA match have in common, the more closely related you are. In my example, I share around 3,500 with my children, 1,500 to 2,000 with my half siblings, and even less with my first cousins. Now we'll discuss some key factors that will impact your results. The first factor is who to test. Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA are subject to random mutations. Well, it's not likely. There could be a mutation between you and your parent. So if they are available, test your father on Y-DNA and your mother on mitochondrial DNA. For autosomal DNA, testing your parents is even more important. One generation closer to your ancestors, they will pick up matches that you won't get. Plus, by testing them separately, you will know that your father's matches are related to you through his family, and your mother's matches are related to you through her family. When you only test yourself, your matches can come from either side, and you usually need further information to tell which. When 2 siblings do an autosomal DNA test, they are often surprised to see that some of their distant matches are different and their ethnic ancestry results are different. Here's why that happens. A child receives 50% of his mother's DNA, but which 50% gets passed on is random, and the next child will get a different mix. The same random inheritance occurs from the father's side. As a result, one child may inherit a lot more or a lot less DNA from a particular branch of the family. The second key factor is ancestor geography. Where your ancestors lived in the world will affect your DNA test results. Here are the facts. First of all, about 80% of the testers on these DNA tests are Americans. The next biggest group is the English-speaking people from countries like Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. The lowest participation is in Africa and Asia. And one thing to remember is that global availability varies considerably by company. Each company has a list of countries they will ship to, and there's a lot of places that can't get certain tests. Okay, now here's the impact of those tests. People with what we call deep colonial roots. In other words, many of your ancestors go back into the colonial period. If you're in that situation, you will see thousands of matches on these tests. On the other hand, children of recent immigrants or foreign-born adoptees will get fewer matches. They, have just as many cousins as the people with deep colonial roots, but most of their distant cousins are not in the US and are not taking these tests. People from endogamous societies, for example, Ashkenazi Jews, will see the most matches, and the relationship projections will probably be overstated because they share DNA from a lot of common ancestors. The third factor is what I call dumb luck. For Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA testing, you may get lots of matches or very few. My wife's brother has over 237 marker Y-DNA matches. Yet a cousin of my wife still has 0 Y-DNA matches several years after testing. When you start talking to people who have done autosomal testing, you will hear wildly conflicting opinions. One person might say that she had great success with one test and no luck at all with another one. Yet another person may report exactly the opposite experience. Well, here's why. If you pick just one test and most of your relatives happen to choose other tests, you won't see them as matches. You can overcome this luck factor by getting into all the databases. Fortunately, that's a lot easier and less expensive than it was a few years ago. I'm hearing every week about adoptees finding a match to a parent, sibling, aunt, uncle, or first cousin. This has become a lot more common as the databases have gotten bigger. Yet the majority of matches you see will be distant cousins. One of the biggest gripes you'll hear from people doing genetic genealogy is that they try to contact matches and some of them simply will not reply. This can happen for a variety of reasons, and once again, luck is a factor. Many of the people you match will be genealogists with extensive family trees. Often, they will have information about certain ancestors that you lack. But all those ads about ethnicity and genetic health have attracted a lot of people who have never started a family tree. They won't be much help. And some of your matches will be adoptees. They can't help you, but maybe you can help them. Now I'm going to review some strengths and limitations of all 5 leading companies. And again, those companies are Family Tree DNA, Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and Living DNA. Okay, so let's talk first about Family Tree DNA. As I said before, they're the only company to offer every test type. They will store your samples for up to 25 years, which is very handy because if you do order a different test later on, you don't have to submit another sample. And that's particularly good, by the way, for your older relatives who may not be around when you want to do another test. They identify genetic matches by name and email, which I really like because you can just simply send an email to your matches to try to contact them. All the other companies use some type of internal communication system. They sponsor about 10,000 DNA projects run by volunteers. They accept free uploads from other tests into Family Finder, and you can pay just an optional $19 fee to open up all the tools if you've uploaded. They also include detailed segment data on the matches. Now, some limitations of family tree DNA, their autosomal database is pretty small, and their ethnicity report lacks the specificity of some of the others. Okay, Ancestry DNA has the largest autosomal DNA database. So you will get more matches here than you will get anywhere else. Also, because it is a genealogy site, many of your matches will have trees posted on site. And the ethnicity report they have is supplemented by something called genetic communities that I will get into in the second presentation. And they have a new side view feature that separates your ethnicity by parent. Now, some limitations of Ancestry, they do not accept uploads from other tests. So the only way you're going to get into their database is to buy a test and give them a sample. They do not provide segment data or a chromosome browser, which many people doing DNA testing love for getting into the details. And of course, they are a subscription site, and if you want a lot of their research features, you're going to have to pay for that. Now, 23andMe has the second largest autosomal DNA database, and they have probably the most detailed and feature-rich ethnicity report. They also report Neanderthal ancestry, which may not be useful in your genealogy, but is otherwise interesting. They also check enough of a man's Y DNA and everybody's mitochondrial DNA to report haplogroups for you. They do include segment data for those matches who are willing to share genomes. And they offer health reports at an additional cost. Limitations at 23andMe, like Ancestry, they do not accept uploads from other tests. So if you want to get into this database, you have to order the test, submit a sample. One thing they have started doing in the last year or so is they cap your number of matches at about 1,500. If you want to see more than that, you have to subscribe for like $29 a year. And again, they have no way that you can upload a GEDCOM file to put a family tree on their site, which some of the others do offer. MyHeritage is the most popular DNA test in Europe. It's the only company based over there. Well, not true. Living DNA is also based in England. But anyway, this is the most popular one in Europe and much of the Middle East and so on. People with European ancestry may find European cousins on this site. It's probably your best chance of doing that. They have the third largest autosomal DNA database, and they do accept free uploads from other tests. If you do upload, there's an optional one-time $29 fee that opens all the tools and gives you your ethnicity estimate that you don't get otherwise from an upload. Their ethnicity reports are supplemented by 2,100 genetic groups, which I will get into in the other presentation. They also offer some health reports as an additional cost upgrade. The main negative here is, like Ancestry, they are a subscription site. If you want to use their research features, you have to pay for that. This Living DNA is a British company, and they took advantage of a big DNA study done by Oxford University called The Peoples of the British Isles. And what that and their own subsequent research has done is allowed them to break British ancestry into 21 subregions. If you have a lot of British ancestry, that may be very interesting to you. Like 23andMe, they check enough of your Y DNA and mitochondrial DNA to report haplogroups. They offer some what they call well-being reports at an additional cost. Limitations there, they have the smallest autosomal database of all. They are the newest of these tests. They have no chromosome browser and no GEDCOM file uploads. Okay, each company provides some on-site tools that help you go well beyond the basic list of genetic matches. And I'm going to show you a few of my favorites. Okay, several of the autosomal DNA tests, as I mentioned, have a chromosome browser. And this lets you see where you and a match share the same DNA segment on the same chromosome. This example shows two of my paternal cousins on Family Finder, one colored blue and the other colored red. The three of us have significant overlaps on chromosomes 13 and 17, and these were passed down from the pair of grandparents that we have in common. One thing I always do is get my close relatives into Family Finder, whether they're tested there or whether I upload them from another test. What you do here is you either import your family tree or just build a small one on the site that includes your tested relatives. And then as you link more relatives, it will automatically sort more of your other matches into either paternal or maternal sides. I have over 6,000 matches, but by selecting one of these tabs, I can focus on the 3,400 matches that are clearly on my paternal side or the 1,100 matches from my maternal side. Since Family Tree DNA is the one company that offers all the test types and some different levels of Y-DNA testing, they have an advanced matches tool. In this example, I have selected all the tests and just look to see if any of my matches has the same surname as one of my grandparents. One of them does. You can also use it to find people who match you on more than one test. For example, on a Y-DNA test and Family Finder. Moving on to Ancestry. A favorite tool there is what they call through lines. While your genetic match list is based only on DNA, this tool looks at the posted family trees of you and your matches and identifies common paper trail ancestors that could be responsible for your DNA match. Note that this is not proof, and many online trees, as you probably know, are not accurate. But these clues are worth checking out. Here you see three of my genetic matches with the suggested paths to our common ancestor. Fanny McGinnis is my great-grandmother. My two matches at the left show paper trails to Fanny's brother George and would be third cousins to me. The match to the right is descended through Fanny's sister Bertha and would be a third cousin once removed to me. For each one, they show how much DNA we share. Ethnicity reports are based only on DNA, and they reflect ancestry from all the way back to 500 years ago. DNA communities on Ancestry attempts to get closer, maybe into the last 200 years, by looking at the places in the family trees of your matches. They include me in two communities, and one of them is called Early Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and East Texas settlers. And indeed, many of my paternal ancestors lived in Alabama and then moved to East Texas. Ancestry has a new technology called side view. This lets you see which ethnicities you inherited from each parent, even if they haven't taken tests. In fact, it has nothing to do with testing them. This is based totally on your DNA. Now, some people will immediately see which parent is which. My ethnicity, on the other hand, is what I would call a Heinz 57 mix of European ancestries on both sides. So if you just look at these different ancestries, it's not obvious. But I do know there is definitely some Irish ancestry on my father's side. When I select a view only Ireland, I see it all came from parent 2. That makes me reasonably sure that my father is parent 2 and my mother is parent 1. Okay, 23andMe will not let you import a family tree, but they will attempt to create one for you that includes some of your DNA matches. They have nodes that represent the apparent structure of your tree in relation to these other people. The nodes are unnamed, but you can edit the tree to add information and correct any errors in linkage. Here's the ethnicity report for my wife on 23andMe. I had her do 8 different ethnicity tests, and I compare the results in my ethnicity presentation that you will see later. Both of her paternal grandparents were born in Croatia, and her mother's known family is from France, Germany, and England. All of these areas appear prominently in her ethnicity report, and some other trace regions may reflect branches of her mother's tree that we have yet to extend. '23andMe places your different ethnicities into a timeline. Here's mine. The 3 most recent ones to the left are ones I know about. The 3 older ones to the right are new to me. They might reflect ancestors I have not yet discovered. Moving on to MyHeritage. They have a tool called Theory of Family Relativity, which is similar in concept to Ancestry's through lines. It uses family trees and genealogical records to show one or more possible paths to common ancestors. As with through lines, this is not proof, but you're getting important clues that may be correct much of the time. One of the most popular techniques today is clustering. This process sorts your DNA matches into groups that most likely descend from a common ancestor. You can do this manually or much more easily through a site called Genetic Affairs. MyHeritage is the only testing company that has licensed this technology to use it directly in your account. As I said before, Living DNA is a British company, and their unique strength is breaking down British ancestry into subregions. Here are the top regions for my wife. Her biggest category is East Anglia related, which is marked on the map in blue. Haplogroups look at the ancient ancestry of your direct paternal and maternal lines. 2 of the autosomal tests will identify a man's paternal haplogroup and everyone's maternal haplogroup. They don't use this for matching. This is done from autosomal DNA alone. Here is the Living DNA test report that shows my DF13 paternal haplogroup is very common in the British Isles. My maternal haplogroup, H5A7, is far less specific. Here's my basic DNA testing strategy. Whether you're a genealogist or an adoptee, you need to get into all 5 of the autosomal DNA databases that provide matches. Again, that's Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, Family Finder, MyHeritage, and Living DNA. And I've marked the first 2 that do not accept uploads of raw data. Now, men should also consider the Y-DNA test for tracing your direct paternal line. And you can think of both autosomal DNA and Y-DNA as fishing expeditions to see what you get. Now, unlike the other test, mitochondrial DNA is not usually great for fishing. Most of the matches you get will share common ancestors too far back to be identified. And because the female surname changes every step up the line. It's not as obvious as a Y DNA test result, where men tend to keep the same surname from father to father. But this can still be a great tool for confirming descent from a specific maternal ancestor, if you find the right subjects to test. Many brilliant programmers have developed tools outside of the DNA testing companies that can extract even more information from your DNA results. Some require you to download your raw data from the testing company and upload it to their site. Others do not. Since 2015, Blaine Bettinger has been asking people to report how much DNA they shared with known relatives. His table is now based on tens of thousands of reports and has been massaged with statistical techniques to remove nonsensical outliers. Since this table is too big to see clearly, I'm going to zoom in on the portion outlined in red. For any given relationship, this table shows the average amount of DNA shared and the range of findings. For example, an aunt or uncle of yours would, on average, share 1,750 centimorgans. But people have reported shared amounts for this relationship as low as 1,349 and as high as 2,175. As you review this table, you will see that the given amount of shared DNA could result from several different relationships. In my case, I have found 4 half-siblings. Based on the DNA we shared, each could have been my grandparent, grandchild, aunt or uncle, or niece or nephew. But in most cases, only one of those relationships will make sense due to age and other known facts about the family trees involved. The people at DNA Painter have combined this data with other research to create a handy interactive tool. Let's say you share 700 centimorgans with someone. Enter 700 into the tool and it will show you the probabilities of various relationships. In this case, it's about 70% likely to be a first cousin and 30% likely to be a first cousin once removed. But once again, there are multiple less common relationships in each group. By the way, this feature is totally free at DNA Painter. So I urge you to bookmark this and look at it regularly when you find new matches and you're wondering how they might be related to you. Gedmatch is the granddaddy of third-party DNA tools. You can upload your raw DNA data and uncover matches with people who did a different test. You can also upload a GEDCOM file of your family tree and automatically compare it to the trees of others. The site has many free tools for analyzing your data and some additional tools that require a subscription. There are and have been other companies doing Y-DNA testing, and some more that used to do mitochondrial DNA testing. This volunteer-run nonprofit called Mito Y-DNA lets anyone upload such data for comparison with others. And again, this is another free site. This is an example of what I would call an advanced topic. Using tools like DNA Painter, people are looking at specific chromosomes, like 7 through 11 shown here, and identifying which segments pass down from which ancestors. In this example, all the dark yellow segments are from a man named Hans Sampson. Another great tool at DNA Painter is WATO, which stands for What Are the Odds? WATO is designed to help you figure out where someone called the target might fit into a known family tree by using the amount of DNA they share with other people in that tree. Now, this is a slide from my Finding Family presentation. I had a first cousin match show up who had no idea how we were related. She also matched several relatives on my paternal side. And as a first cousin DNA match, she had to be the child of one of my 4 deceased uncles. Well, this tool showed me which one it was. I mentioned earlier that MyHeritage had licensed the AutoCluster tool from Genetic Affairs. That company has developed many additional tools to make genetic genealogy more productive. Once you've got DNA results and a family tree to work with, you may want to check out some of the tools on their website. You can do some things for free and others require a modest subscription. I think it's like $5 a month or something. Well, this concludes Genetic Genealogy Overview. I currently have 3 other presentations. One covers the subject of DNA testing for ethnic ancestry, which we're going to get into next. Another shares my personal DNA success story and covers today's tools for finding unknown relatives and interpreting surprise matches. The third one dives deeply into the subject of why DNA testing. Each presentation is entirely different, and if you enjoyed this presentation, I'd be happy to return for more.
Hey, baby.
So DNA testing for genealogy is an online experience. Fortunately, the internet is also a great place to learn all you need to know. Here's the path I recommend you take to learn more. For a basic, easy to understand grounding in DNA testing, start with my website, dnafavorites.com. You can see the menu of pages in red. Starting near the top and moving down from one page to the next provides a great overview of genetic genealogy today. And along the way, you'll find more than 150 links that can take you directly to the most useful DNA testing resources. The DNA testing companies all have educational resources for their users. Family Tree DNA has some of the best in their help center. Here are the links offered in just the section on standard Y-DNA testing. The most comprehensive online resource for genetic genealogy is the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. In particular, they have a great wiki that you can just browse or search for specific subjects. As I've said before, DNA testing is especially important to me. When I sent in my sample in late 2006, I had no idea that I would be a pioneer. I became the first known case of an adoptee identifying birth family through a genetic genealogy DNA test. And you can read the whole story of my decades-long search in my book, Finding Family, My Search for Roots and the Secrets in My DNA. It's available in print, Kindle, and audiobook formats at Amazon.com and other booksellers. And of course, you can read it at your local library, including this one. I've quoted one professional book reviewer here, plus a summary of more than 600 reader reviews on Amazon. In addition to my DNA Favorites website, I have a DNA Favorites Facebook page. Also look for the name Richard Hill DNA on Twitter and LinkedIn. Now, this is going to conclude my presentation on Genetic Genealogy Overview. And I will now stop sharing my screen, return to my camera, and I can try to answer any questions you have about this presentation or DNA testing in general. Stop sharing the screen.
Thank you, Richard.
Video back on.
Great. Thank you so much. That was exceptionally clear and well presented. I thought thank you so much. That was a lot of great information. I do have a question in the chat here. It says, the Army has asked me for a DNA test for a potential second cousin once removed. They require 3 individuals. Will the results be of any use to me? And what test would they use?
I have no idea what the Army is doing and why they are doing this. Unless this might be, I know there are groups that help identify remains of soldiers that could be part of that project. If you're just doing it through the Army and you're not, paying for a test at one of the major test sites, you're probably not going to have access to the data, I would guess. They may indeed be using one of the major test sites. The people who are involved in such projects do use those sites, but they're doing it from the point of view of what they're trying to find out, which might be to identify a deceased soldier or a crime victim or something like that, and they would not be giving the data back to you.
Yeah, and Mary is saying this is to identify remains, so that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Jan has a question here. If my dad is already gone, is there any way to figure out his Y DNA?
Well, did your dad have any sons or grandsons, sons of sons? Or did he have a brother who had a son? You can even go back farther if you have to. Go back his father's father and see if there were other sons that had sons who are still alive. The idea is you've got to find a living male who is in this exact same paternal line as you.
Carolyn asks that she says her mom has passed. I just lost it here. How can I find out her DNA?
Well, first of all, you have half of your DNA came from her. So by testing yourself, you're still going to find a lot of matches that are related to you through your mother. That's the beauty of this. You don't have to test deceased ancestors. You can test yourself, and because you contain a lot of the DNA from particularly the more recent deceased ancestors. So again, just test yourself. You're going to see a lot of people related to you through your mother's side. And say in a case like I said on Ancestry, with their new test, you do the Ancestry test, their ethnicity report is not only going to tell you your ethnic ancestry, they'll tell you your mother's ethnic ancestry and how it breaks out. So kind of cool.
Gerald says, I'm getting nowhere beyond my grandparents who immigrated from Sicily in the 1910s. Don't Italians care about their ancestry, and can you recommend any next step?
Yeah, that's the problem. Once you get overseas, you have lots of other people who descended from your family over there. But again, most of them are not in English-speaking countries, and relatively few of them take these tests, which are all offered by English-speaking countries. Again, if you haven't tried MyHeritage, I would do that first. Again, they have the biggest coverage in Europe. So that's probably your best chance of coming up with a match who is living in Europe and descended from your Italian ancestors.
Marianne asks, if I already have transferred my ancestry test to MyHeritage, is there any benefit for me to test directly with MyHeritage?
No, that you will get the same results that there could be tiny, tiny differences, but nothing significant, nothing worth testing directly. No, you're already in. Now, again, they have an optional fee if you want to use some of their tools and get the ethnicity report. So I think that's $29. So you might want to pay that fee. And then you're just like, you've got everything that anybody who submitted directly has.
And for Gerald, I think Rick is saying that the Summit County chapter of OGS will be having a program about Italian ancestry next Saturday, in case you want to join that and learn more about that. That may help you out. Let's see, what is the next one here?
Carolyn.
Carolyn, is there a test for an American Indian in a person? I ran into a question of my 6th great grandfather.
Okay. Native American ancestry can pop up in any 3 of the test types with the Y-DNA and the mitochondrial DNA. If you have an ancestor in that direct paternal line going back, dozens and dozens of generations that descended from the original Native Americans, you would get a certain haplogroup that is identified as Native American. Same with the mitochondrial test. The autosomal test can also pick up Native American ancestry, but it rarely does. And I'm going to get into that in my second presentation. You'll see why that doesn't happen very often.
Jan asks, how do you get the raw data saved from Ancestry to upload elsewhere?
Okay, every one of the tests somewhere in your account, you log into your account at Ancestry, for example, and I don't remember exactly where it is, but there will be somewhere where it says download raw data, save raw data, something like that. And you basically save a file to your computer. And you don't want to open that file because it's compressed, and it would be, if you did open it, it would be a monster amount of garbage that you can't read. But you just download it to your file, and then you go over to MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, wherever you want to upload it, and they will have a place where you can upload it, and then they will ask you to find that file on your computer and upload it. So that's basic process.
Okay. Gerald just is asking, what is SCOGS? And Rick is answering, it is the Summit County chapter of the Ohio Genealogical Society. And Gerald, if you don't know, the Ohio Genealogical Society is I believe, the largest state genealogical society in the country. It's comprised of many county chapters. Summit County has one, and they meet on the 3rd Saturday of almost every month here at the library. So I'm sure you'd be welcome to at that meeting. Just Google it, and they'll give you the information, and I'm sure they'd be glad to see you there. Or you can ask us. You can give us a call. That's fine too. Are there any other questions for Richard? Okay, well, Richard, once again, thank you very much. I have tested with all 5 of those companies, and I'm familiar with a lot of those tools. And as I said, I feel that you explained them very well. So thank you very much. We're going to take a short break here. I have 11:31 on my computer clock. And so I'm going to stop recording, and we'll come back at about 11:40. Thank you.
Okay, let me start my, let's see, I got to get rid of that. And share the screen. Okay, everybody see the screen? All right, good. All right, well, welcome to Understanding the Ethnic Ancestry in Your DNA Test. I chose this image because it shows a very common reaction to ethnicity reports, and maybe that's you too. Maybe your results are not consistent with your family tree, and maybe you tested with more than one company and got strikingly different results. Or maybe you and a sibling took the same test and did not look like you shared the same ancestors. So here's what we're going to cover today. We'll explain why ethnic ancestry has become such a hot topic. You will learn many reasons why results don't match expectations. We'll talk about why Native American ancestry is so rarely found and why results vary by company. Then we're going to compare the results of 8 different DNA tests for one person of European ancestry. Other examples will include siblings, an African American, and a person of Mexican ancestry. Then I'll share some conclusions. You may remember this ad. It appeared many years ago. This man traded his lederhosen for a kilt because an Ancestry DNA test told him that he was Scottish instead of German. It was one of the first ads to promote the ethnic ancestry feature of an autosomal DNA test. You might wonder why they decided to run ads like this. Well, let's look at the market for at-home DNA tests. The original target was the genealogy market. And at that time, only a fraction of genealogists were ordering tests. After my success, many other adoptees began to test, looking for birth parents and siblings. Then others who discovered that the man who raised them was not their biological father also began testing, even children of sperm donors. But the overall market still wasn't huge and growth was modest. By targeting people who are simply curious about their ethnic ancestry, the testing companies have created a far bigger market. And for the most part, it does include the people in the first 3 groups, as most of us are also curious about our ethnic ancestry. The strategy worked. After the ethnicity ad started, growth in the autosomal DNA databases skyrocketed. The total number of people tested is now more than 30 million, with 20 million of them taking the Ancestry DNA test. This explosive growth in testing is one of those good news, bad news situations. The good news for genealogists is that we are seeing many more matches, and adoptees are finding closer matches, which makes the search for birth families much easier. The bad news is that most of these new testers are not genealogists and know little or nothing about their family trees. But there is hope. Ethnicity reports are the gateway drug to genealogy. Some of these people who tested for ethnicity reasons are getting hooked on genealogy, and we can help them along when we encounter them among our matches. The ethnicity reports themselves are not always well received. Countless people have been confused or even shocked by their ethnicity results. So why don't the results match expectations? One big reason is the issue of random inheritance. Yes, we get 50% of our DNA from our mother, but which 50% we get is random. And it's the same thing for our father's DNA. Here's an example. Let's say your 4 grandparents are German, English, Italian, and Swedish. You would expect your ethnicity to show up in 4 equal parts of 25% each. To demonstrate the concept of random inheritance, let's represent your 4 grandparents by the 4 suits in a deck of cards. Hearts for your paternal grandfather, diamonds for your paternal grandmother, and so on. Now open 2 decks of playing cards and set up 2 new decks, one with 52 red cards representing your paternal side, and the other with 52 black cards representing your maternal side. Let's start with the red deck and shuffle all 52 red cards together. Then deal out the first 26. Will you get exactly 13 hearts and 13 diamonds? Maybe, but most likely it won't be an even split. Repeat the process with the black cards for your maternal side. Once again, an uneven split of some kind is the more likely outcome, as anyone who plays bridge can attest. As a result of this randomness, we can inherit significantly different amounts of DNA from each grandparent. One possible split is shown here: 33% from your paternal grandfather and only 17% from your paternal grandmother. The same kind of uneven split can occur on your mother's side. This random inheritance also explains why siblings will see different ethnicity results. Each conception is a unique event with its own random selection of each parent's DNA. Essentially, the cards are reshuffled and dealt again. It's a whole new game. So unless you have an identical twin, each brother or sister will only share about half of your DNA, and they will often show a different mix of ethnicities. Beyond random inheritance, there are many other reasons why results don't match expectations. First, people expect ethnicity to match recent ancestors' countries of origin. And instead, we're actually getting something called admixture that can reflect hundreds of far more distant ancestors. Let's look at one of your grandparents and assume you received an average 25% of your DNA from him. That means 12.5% came from each of his parents, 6% from each of their parents, and so on. Random inheritance doesn't just affect your generation. It happened at every step down your family tree. Go back to your great-great-great-great-grandparents. You have 64 of them, and 16 are in this grandparent's branch. Their average contribution to your DNA is about 1.5%. But due to random inheritance, some of them have dropped way below that average to undetectable levels. This means that some of your distant ancestors who are in your genealogical family tree are really not part of your genetic family tree. Here's another possibility. Can we be absolutely certain of every ancestor's real ethnicity going back hundreds of years? Throughout history, many ethnic groups have faced serious and sometimes dangerous discrimination. I'm sure you can think of examples. Some of our ancestors may have adopted a different ethnicity than what they were born with. Another complicating factor is the movement and mixing of people. The Vikings are a great example, as shown in this map of their voyages, going way back into the 700s and 800s. They even ventured into the Mediterranean and up some of the rivers in Eastern Europe and Russia. And just like modern sailors, Viking men often left their DNA behind in the local population. Finally, notice that the title of this map is Territories and Voyages of the Vikings. Let's look at this close-up of the British Isles and the coast of France. Those light green areas represent Viking settlements. For whatever reason, maybe it was milder winters, many Vikings decided to stay. So for more than 1,000 years, a lot of Viking DNA has been mixing with other ethnicities in such areas. In modern times, we have national borders between countries, but this should remind us that nationality and genetic ethnicity are not the same thing. Because of all this movement, many ethnicities are difficult to distinguish genetically. Those Vikings made it challenging to separate Scandinavian from British ancestry. France and Germany share a single landmass with no natural barriers to impede migration. And even in modern times, the border between these two countries has changed numerous times. Italy and the Middle East are both on the Mediterranean Sea, and traffic between the two regions has been continuous since before the Roman Empire. Another thing to note, our test reports often include some very small numbers, like 2 or 3% or even 0.2%. These tiny numbers could be real, or they could just be statistical noise. Be careful about drawing conclusions from small percentages. Some ethnicities do stand out clearly. The basic distinction among European, African, and Asian is obvious because those original migrations out of Africa go back hundreds of thousands of years. It's when we try to break down those continents into modern day countries that things get fuzzy. Ashkenazi Jewish is quite distinctive because it's an endogamous society where people have married within their own community for thousands of years. And finally, that original Native American DNA is also quite distinctive. So here's a puzzle. Even though Native American DNA does stand out, very few Americans of European ancestry are seeing it in our ethnicity report. According to 23andMe, only 2.7% show any Native American DNA, and less than 1% have 2% or more Native American DNA. Throughout most of human history, the Americas were devoid of people. Then, thousands of years ago, the first Native Americans arrived from Asia. Some crossed a land bridge that existed for a time across the Bering Strait. Others may have come by sea. More than 500 years ago, Europeans began arriving in what to them was the New World. They came to explore, plunder, and form settlements. This map shows some of the earliest arrivals of the Vikings, English, French, and Spanish to North and Central America. As paintings like this remind us, Native Americans began to mix with Europeans. European DNA began to dilute that original Native American DNA. 15 or 20 generations later, most Native Americans carried significant amounts of European ancestry. And whatever fragments of that Asian-derived DNA they still had continues to decline at every generation going forward. Here's a fascinating map from 23andMe. It shows the percentage of European Americans in each state that have at least 2% Native American ancestry. In the eastern states, the number is mostly 1% or less. In the western states, it can be as high as 4%. Well, that makes sense because Eastern tribes have been in contact with Europeans longer. So if you have a family legend of a Cherokee ancestor, your odds of showing Native American DNA on one of these tests are not good. You might wonder why we don't sample enough of today's Native Americans to create a modern reference population. Well, very few living Native Americans will agree to be tested. So Native Americans are not well represented in the genetic genealogy databases. But it doesn't really matter. Here are some key points I learned from genetic genealogy expert Blaine Bettinger. Having Native American DNA is not the same as being Native American. To be Native American, an indigenous community must claim you. So no DNA test can prove that you are or are not Native American. If you have tried more than one DNA testing company, you have surely noticed that your ethnicity reports can vary, often by quite a lot. First of all, the challenges and limitations I just covered apply to every DNA testing company. Nobody has a magic bullet to get around these issues. Now we add in the fact that each company approaches the estimation of ethnicity in its own unique way. Here are 4 major differences. The sampling for these tests is done through what they call chips. The first companies used an off-the-shelf chip that sampled the same locations. Now, most of them are using customized chips. For example, a company that's also interested in the health side of DNA testing will choose more medically significant locations. Companies use different reference populations with vastly different regions and numbers. For example, let's say you have ancestry from Lithuania. If you test with a company that has a good-sized reference population specific to that area, they could report you as Lithuanian. Companies that don't have that can only include you in some larger region, such as Eastern Europe. Each company has a unique proprietary algorithm for comparing our DNA with their reference populations. Each one probably thinks their way is best, but they are inevitably different. Each testing company defines different regional groupings and gives them inconsistent names. You will see many examples of that when we get into specific findings. So let's test one person on every major test and compare the results. My own ancestry is mostly British, way too narrow for interesting comparisons. My wife, Pat, on the other hand, has a great mix of ancestry for comparing DNA results. Both of her paternal grandparents were born in Croatia, so we can expect 50% of her ancestry to be from regions that include Croatia. That gives us a good standard for comparison. Her known maternal ancestry comes from England, France, and Germany. To create this presentation, I bought these 8 tests and had Pat do every one. Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA's Family Finder, MyHeritage, Living DNA, CRI Genetics, Geno 2.0, and Insotomy. None of these use data transferred from another test. She had to spit into a tube or swab her cheeks for every one of them. Now, Pat is not a genealogist, yet she has been a pretty good sport most of the time. I did hear some complaints. In addition to her many other fine qualities, Pat is now an accomplished expert at using both spit kits and cheek swabs. As I said earlier, half of Pat's ancestry is from Croatia. On this map, Croatia is shown in dark green, just across the Adriatic Sea from Italy. It's part of the Balkan Peninsula that stretches from Hungary down to Greece. Pat's ancestors lived for centuries on the long, narrow strip of southern Croatia known as the Dalmatian coast. I mentioned earlier that each testing company has different regional groupings with inconsistent names. Here are the regions that could reflect Croatian ancestry for each of the 8 companies. Just skimming the list will show you that they vary considerably in name and geography. I'll give you a moment to do that. It's not just different names, but vastly different groupings. Here's a comparison of Family Finder and Ancestry DNA tests for my wife's European ancestry. They have little in common. So let's go through the results. And let's start with Pat's ethnicity report on the Insotomy regional ancestry test. This test is no longer being offered. For each report, I am flagging the regions that include Croatia with green symbols and adding up the percentages. On Insotomy, North Mediterranean and East European total 41%. Then I mark anything that is totally outside her known ancestry with a red question mark. In this case, that's 8% Basque and 7% Ashkenazi. Next, we'll look at Pat's results on Geno 2.0, the national genographic test that is no longer offered to the public. The 2 regions that include Croatia on Geno 2.0 are Eastern Europe and a region identified broadly as Italy and Southern Europe. They total 47%. Like the Insotomy test, this one also shows some Jewish ethnicity. I mentioned earlier that Ashkenazi DNA is readily detectable, and yet none of the other 6 tests found any of it in Pat's DNA. Here are Pat's results for the CRI genetics test. I had not included this test originally, but they were advertising heavily and many people were asking me for my opinion. So I had Pat do this one too. The only region on this test that includes Croatia is called Southern Central Slavic at about 20%. It looks like much of her Croatian has been misidentified as Italian. The sum of those 2 regions would be 46%. The small amounts from Spain and Scandinavia are outside her known ancestry and could just be statistical noise. Here's the My Origins report that's included with Pat's Family Finder test results. The 3 regions that cover Croatia total 41%. 2 of the questionable regions are marked with a black circle that identifies them as trace percentages that may not be real. The one odd one is Baltic. That covers Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So far, we have not discovered any of Pat's ancestry from that region. Now let's look at Pat's ethnicity breakdown on MyHeritage. Balkan and East European add up to 45%. Iberian would be Spain and Portugal, which does not fit any known ancestry, but there are hints of this in some of the other reports. Finnish may just be noise. A new feature at MyHeritage is genetic groups. They look at the family trees of her genetic matches to supplement the ethnicity numbers. This even includes more recent migrations within the United States. Many of Pat's mother's ancestors did migrate through Pennsylvania and Ohio before ending up in Michigan. Had we not known this already, such a clue could have been helpful. Living DNA is known for breaking out British ancestry into subregions. It breaks mine into 9 of them, but it only places Pat into 2 larger groups. Living DNA has a pretty specific region called West Balkans that includes Croatia. They also have a region called Pannonia that touches northern Croatia for a total of 53%. The 1.6% is the region they call Northeast Europe, is nowhere near any of Pat's known ancestry, but it does include the Baltic region reported in Family Finder and Ancestry. That ancestry could be from a branch we have not yet identified. Next, we'll look at Pat's ethnicity breakdown on 23andMe. Nearly all of Pat's Croatian ancestry is reported in the Greek and Balkan region. Add in the small amount classified as Eastern Europe, and the Croatian total is 49%. The only question marks are traces of Scandinavian and Italian that are so small that they may just be noise. In Croatia, 23andMe actually breaks out her evidence of ancestry into counties. The top 3 counties are all along the Dalmatian coast. I've added red dots to show the villages where her paternal grandfather and grandmother were born. Their ancestors have been in those areas for many generations. This is very impressive regarding the specificity of the location. 23andMe also provides a timeline to estimate how far back these different ethnicities appeared in your family tree. Pat's paternal grandparents were born in the 1870s, and the Balkan timeline is clearly the most recent. Her mother's known ancestry from France, Germany, and the British Isles have been in the US much longer. The other 3 regions, if they are real, reflect ancestors much further back that we have not identified. 23andMe also reports where specific ethnicities appear on your chromosomes. You can highlight certain ethnicities, as I did here with British and Irish. Note that these all appear on the top of each chromosome pair. That means it all came from the same parent, in this case, her mother. By the way, do not assume that the top row is always the mother. There is no fixed order. Finally, here's Pat's ethnicity report from the Ancestry DNA test. On this test, Croatia is covered directly by the Balkans. A second group called Eastern Europe and Russia is closely related. They total 50%. Note that they have specifically identified her Balkans ancestry as Croatian and from the Dalmatian coast. Ancestry has a supplemental report called Genetic Communities. Similar to genetic groups on MyHeritage, this is based on DNA plus the family trees of Pat's genetic matches. It looks for geographic clusters in a more recent time frame. The first one confirms Pat's paternal ancestry in Croatia. The second one reflects her maternal side ancestry in Pennsylvania. Ancestry has introduced a technology called side view that assigns your ethnicity to your individual parents without testing them. Now, it can't automatically tell you which parent is which, so they name them parent 1 and parent 2. The ethnicities are color-coded by the regions listed below. The half circles on the left show the breakout of each parent. The full circle on the right shows your breakout. And notice that in each of these three areas, they order them in the order of how much you have. The light green one is the largest in each case, well, in two of the three cases, and so on. You can select certain ethnicities to view them individually. By selecting these two, the Balkans and Eastern Europe and Russia, I can be 100% certain that parent 1 is Pat's father and parent 2 must be her mother. If you have a mix of similar ethnicities on both sides, you may not be able to determine which parent is which, but this is a fascinating new tool. Here's a table to summarize Pat's results for her 3 known ethnicities on all 8 tests. Many of the rows total less than 100% because most tests also reported DNA from additional regions. Geno 2.0 and Insotomy could not even distinguish French and German from British. They just reported very broad regions called Western Europe or Northwestern Europe. There's a lot of detail here. Now I'm going to leave this table up for a while and proceed slowly as I direct your attention to different parts. With Pat's paternal ancestry all from Croatia, we expected to see about 50% from that area. Except for that 20% from CRI Genetics, which measured much of that ancestry as Italian, every test showed this is her largest group, and many of them were around 50%. Estimates of Pat's French and German ancestry varied tremendously, from a low of 11% on MyHeritage to a high of 41% on Family Finder. Naturally, the tests showing high French and German report low percentages of British. The range goes all the way from 8% on living DNA to 34% on Ancestry. If you want still more opinions on your ethnicity, you can upload your raw data from one of these tests to Gedmatch.com. They have several admixture utilities you can run on your data. Here are Pat's results from 2 of them. Oddly, both show small amounts of Asian ancestry, which was not reported on any of the 8 company tests, and frankly makes no sense to me. Now, let's compare 2 full siblings who take the same test. My son and daughter both tested on Family Finder. My son shows 39% Scandinavian, which I noted can be confused with British. My daughter shows no Scandinavian at all, with 3/4 of her DNA lumped into Central Europe. Each of them shows some ancestry from Eastern and Southern Europe, which reflects their mother's Croatian side. This is why I tell people to never draw any conclusions about relationships from a DNA ethnicity report. I transferred the Family Finder data on my children to MyHeritage. So each company is looking at the same data, but MyHeritage still has different reference populations, a different algorithm for comparing data to the references, and different regional groupings. My son showed 39% Scandinavian on Family Finder, but that has all been identified as British ancestry here. Yet neither test can break out 3/4 of my daughter's DNA into anything much more precise than Central or North and West European. I wanted to include some examples of ancestry outside of Europe. Shannon Christmas, an African-American genealogy expert, graciously shared his results with me. His favorite is the 23andMe test, which provides the most detail for him. He is mostly Nigerian, with contributions from several other African regions. With no paper records on the earliest slave ancestors, this has to be fascinating for anyone of African ancestry. Like most African Americans, Shannon has some European ancestry, probably introduced during the era of slavery. His biggest piece is British and Irish at 6%. Most of the numbers on the right side of this table are so small that they may just be noise. In case you were wondering, there is no such thing as Mexican DNA. Like the United States, Mexico is a melting pot of ethnicities. Moises Garza, a specialist in Mexican genealogy, shared his DNA results with me. The first Europeans in Mexico were Spanish conquistadors. Mostly young single men, they were there a long time, and some stayed for good. The only women around were Native American. As a result, Mexicans typically have a mix of Spanish and Native American ancestry. Like most countries in the Americas, Mexico also received many slaves from Africa. So that ancestry is also common among people of Mexican descent. Of the 8 tests that Pat did, 3 stand out to me as clearly inferior. Insotomy, Geno 2.0, and CRI Genetics did the worst in measuring ethnicity. Plus, none of these 3 report your genetic matches with other testers. There are many other companies offering DNA ethnicity tests now that are also a big waste of money. I don't name them because I don't want to give them any publicity. But here are the warning signs. Any autosomal DNA test based on STR markers. Any test that promises to place you into a specific Native American or African tribe. And any test that promises to trace your ancestry to a specific village. These companies are selling wishful thinking to people who don't know about better alternatives. So which tests do I recommend for ethnicity purposes? 23andMe and Ancestry Dna have the most varied and innovative ethnicity reports. And in Pat's case, they clearly did the best job of measuring her 50% Croatian ancestry from her father. Yet even these reports disagree considerably when it comes to her mother's Northern European ancestry. Unfortunately, we don't know enough on her lines and don't have enough of them traced to Europe to know which test really did a better job with that. Your results will be quite different from Pat's results. I first created this presentation for a Roots Tech conference in 2019, and I've had to review it many times since then as her results have changed. Also keep in mind that testing company strengths are not uniform across all regions, and the companies do add reference populations and adjust their algorithms periodically, and that's why our results do change. Early in this presentation, I stated with confidence that Pat's paternal side was all Croatian. How we identified her paternal family tree is a reminder that breakthrough matches can appear anywhere. Now, Pat's brother did a Y-DNA test at Family Tree DNA, and not surprisingly, his matches have direct paternal lines from the area in and around Croatia. As the one managing his account, I was contacted by the sister of a Y-DNA match. She is a genealogist living in Croatia who reads and writes English, and she offered to help. I shared the names, birth dates, and villages of Pat's grandparents, which were all we knew. She searched Croatian state archives and even traveled to the parish churches that served their ancestral villages. She copied and translated the records from Italian and Croatian into English. Thanks to the information provided by this Croatian genealogist, I can now trace every branch of Pat's Croatian ancestry into the 1700s. And with more ancestors in her family tree, I can now see exactly how Pat connects to several of her third and fourth cousin paternal side matches on the autosomal DNA test. Unfortunately, the common male ancestor responsible for the Y-DNA match was too far back, so we never did figure out the connection to the Croatian genealogist. So what should we conclude regarding DNA testing for ethnicity? I recommend that you keep things in perspective. In the world of genetic genealogy, ethnicity estimates are the sideshow. They're certainly interesting and something to talk about or debate. And in some cases, they may even provide useful clues. But for genealogists and adoptees, the main event under the big top is the reporting of genetic matches. That's the information most likely to expand and confirm our family trees and introduce us to previously unknown relatives. Each DNA test has a separate database of mostly different people, and your most useful matches may show up anywhere. Now that prices are so low and some companies even accept free uploads from others, you should be in every database that provides matching. Well, this concludes the DNA ethnicity presentation. And as I said, I currently have 3 other presentations, one of which you saw on the Genetic Genealogy Overview, and then 2 others described here. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open it up for questions again.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions they want to put in the chat? Not seeing any so far. I think that's one of the things that I've noticed about people who test is they're always surprised by those ethnicity results, and I think many people who test don't quite understand it all. So I think that was a very useful breakdown of how it all works and why they are so different.
Yes.
Nope. I think he just blew us all away. There we go. Susan has a question. Does Living DNA have any good teaching videos about their platform?
I don't remember any, but every testing company is periodically changing things, adding stuff. All I can say is go into your account if you've got an account there, or if you don't, just go to the website and just poke around and see. I'm not aware of any. Another thing you might do is just do a YouTube search for Living DNA, and you might find something where somebody else may have done something on it. You can find almost how to do anything on YouTube, it seems like.
Just on Living DNA's website really quickly, it looks like they have what they call a free 7-day email course. So I don't see any videos necessarily that are freely available without having an account, but they do have this course.
Okay. Yeah, as I said in my first presentation, each of the companies has something on their website that tries to educate you and help answer questions. But it's usually a different approach with every one of them.
Carolyn is asking what is a good form to use for a family tree? Would you like to try to answer that one?
That's more of a genealogy question than a genetic genealogy question. I would say you're probably better qualified to answer that than I am.
If you're going to record these things on paper, the two forms that you would want to use are like a pedigree chart, which basically just traces from child to parent, grandparent, great grandparents, and so on. And then another good form to use for is a family group chart, which is a couple and all of their children and detailed information on those. Those are really the two basic ones that are useful on paper. And there are a number of sources you can get them from. Ancestry.com actually has some free resources. You don't have to have an account with them. And I believe you can download some of their forms that are those particular type. And we have.
I'm really not a good one to answer that question, because most people have been longtime genealogists and then got into DNA testing later. I did this all backwards. I was not a genealogist, had no interest in it, and I began searching for my birth father's side, and that's how I got into DNA testing. And then once I found all the branches of my main branches of my biological family, that's when I got into genealogy. And by that time, pretty much everything was online. So I never got into any of the paper world of genealogy. I've done nothing on paper, other than, of course, taking notes and things like that. But I don't build trees on paper or anything like that.
Jan asks, any ideas on how to get a sibling to take a DNA test? They have privacy issues.
I have only been able to get 2 of my own 3 children to test. I have a daughter that won't test. And I understand that I think a lot of the privacy stuff is overblown. First of all, these tests are not sampling your entire DNA. It's not like they're going to clone you or anything like that. They're only looking at a small sample of your DNA. And then they have really good privacy structures and stuff. And again, there's really not much anybody can do with your DNA. Some political figures are reluctant, and I know a recent case in the news was, I think it was the French president that went to meet with Vladimir Putin in Russia, and he was asked to take a PCR test, primarily for checking that he didn't have COVID, I guess, and he refused to do so. And I guess the concern there was that they could analyze it for medical issues, and if he had some kind of a medical problem that that could be used to blackmail him if he didn't want that medical problem brought out. Just even that was kind of far-fetched. But if you're not a celebrity or a world leader, I've never personally been worried about it.
I would agree, but I would also like to add that I feel like we shouldn't push other people to test, and you don't want to damage your relationship with the person over this. It's not worth it. It is very much a personal choice, and yes, there are issues involved that people are concerned about. So you have to be forgiving about it. That's been the case in my experience. So, yeah. Pat is asking, please explain noise.
Okay, all of these processes where they compare your DNA to the reference populations are done through computer algorithms. And there can just be, as a result of this, some statistical, what do I call them? Statistical anomalies that aren't real data. They're just small amounts of stuff they can't figure out properly where they might go, and they might get assigned to a region of the world that really isn't correct. And they're just errors, I guess I would say.
All right, anything else? I'm not seeing anything pop up. Oh. Okay, any last words, Richard?
You did talk about concerns, and there is one area of concern that I think is legitimate, that only affects a couple of places. One is primarily Gedmatch, and the other is the family tree DNA family finder. In both of those tests, you have the option to include your DNA in something that can be used by law enforcement to search to solve crimes. You probably have heard that there have been a lot of cases of serial killers and others that have been identified decades later through using this type of DNA data. And what they do with that is they take data from a crime scene and create a sample that's suitable for submission to these tests. They put it either in Family Finder or most commonly in Gedmatch, and look for relatives. And then the idea, even though that the perpetrator probably isn't in there, there may be some close relatives of his. And so if they find a close relative, they can then go in and explore the family tree of that close relatives and find people, usually they're men, who have lived in the time and place where these crimes were committed. And all that does is give them a suspect. And then they have to go in and do real police work and find real evidence. All this does is it narrows down the suspect list, and it sometimes exonerates people. There's been cases where people have been suspected of a crime, but there wasn't any proof. And they've kind of lived with this hanging over their heads for a long time, where people assume they're the killer and just getting away with it. And there have been cases where such people have been exonerated because this points in an entirely different direction. When this first started out, it really split the genetic genealogy community. And I'm talking about people who write books, give talks, and so on this. On one hand, the argument is that, hey, if these people are, have murdered people and they happen to be a distant relative of mine, I'm very happy for my DNA to have been used to get them off the streets and punish them for their crime. Or it's also used to identify victims. There may be bodies that have been recovered who they could not identify, and it's sometimes given closure to the families involved. So many people say, this is a good thing, I'm glad we're doing it, I'm glad to help. Other people say, that's not what I submitted my DNA for. I don't like mine being used that way. It's also exposing my relatives. And if I do have a relative that was involved in some kind of a serious criminal activity, do I want to be the one that, points a finger at him? So it's a legitimate argument. I myself participate in those. I fall on the side that, hey, I'm all for it. But I know other people who I know and respect who have exactly the opposite view. But the nice thing about it is, in either case, you can go in and in part of your account settings. And when you do any DNA test, you should check your account settings, and you can select in those two cases whether you want to participate in that or not. Because if you opt out of it, they will not use your DNA for that purpose. So that's I think a major thing to be aware of as far as reasons to be tested or not to be tested.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think too, what bothers me about these news stories is that they rarely or never name the company or service that's being used. And so I think people get the impression that Ancestry is in this business, and they're not, according to their policies. So, most of these companies have protections in place and prevent law enforcement use of their DNA databases. As you say, Family Tree DNA is the only company that we know that really does it, and also the only third-party service that we know of is Gedmatch, and both have opt-outs, as you say.
Yes. And then another thing is primarily with 23andMe, 23andMe uses the collective data of all of their testers to do medical research. They are looking for, and they'll ask you surveys, which you can ignore if you want, or complete, like your health history or things like that. And what they're trying to do is, and have done really, is they've created a huge database of DNA relating to various medical conditions. And they are hoping to find, eventually find cures for various diseases by finding the genetic connections to certain health issues. But in order to do that, they are licensing that data to like drug companies, for example. And the drug companies are the ones doing the research. Now, you're not identified even if you do participate in that, and you can choose, again, you can opt in or opt out. But you are not identified as a person. They just use the collective data, which is really all they need. But some people say, hey, I'm paid money to 23andMe to test my DNA. Now they're reselling my DNA and making money off it. So some people don't like that for that reason. So, that's another area that gets into this reasons why some people might be reluctant to test. But again, I think you can opt out of most of their research.
To me, it's such a shame that there's just no getting around it because of the nature of it. But, it is a shame that there's so many legal and ethical issues surrounding DNA testing, because the knowledge that we can gain from it is immense and in all kinds of fields. So, yeah, it's a tough one. This is the era that we're in. That's
right. But hopefully it's going to provide medical breakthroughs that will help us and certainly our children.
Yeah.
So, Richard, I had a question. Do you think that the Eastern European DNA testing will expand in the future? Do you see any trends that way?
I haven't seen any trends that way. But on the other hand, I do know that my wife's brother, who has over 200 Y-DNA matches on his paternal line, they stretch not just in Croatia, but Bosnia and even over into, I think, as far maybe as Romania. So there are some people obviously doing that test, and if they're doing that test, I assume there's some of them doing the others. But it's a problem I pointed out originally, that this is mostly an activity of English-speaking people. And even in England, where of course the original home of English-speaking people, there so many people already know their family trees, because it's been maybe it's because of their royalty or that they traced for so long, that people are more likely to have traced and be aware of their family trees than Americans are, who most of us came here from immigrants who didn't read or write, and the oral history was lost. So even in England, we don't get as many people testing as we would like, because many of us have, like myself, we have British ancestry, and we would love more people in Britain to test. We love to get more matches there. But again, because so many of them already know their family history, they're not particularly interested.
So Gerald is saying why is there so little interest in ancestry comparatively in Southern Europe and Eastern Europe today than elsewhere? And you say this is a movement of English-speaking people, but why?
Well, I think because the testing companies' websites are in English. And your reports are in English. So if
Yeah, I
you're-
mean, the testing companies are based in the US and or England and Europe. But yeah, so it's a good question. I think genealogy as a whole it's been sort of a thing that has come to America from the British Isles. And I do think that for some reason, Americans in particular have an interest because of our varied backgrounds. As you say, Richard, you know, so many people whose families have been in these places for generations, you know, that it's not a surprise for them. It's not as much of a learning experience for them, I would think.
Yeah. And again, like my wife's family who stayed in Croatia, they generally aren't looking for ancestor or relatives outside of Croatia. You know, they figure most of their family has always been in Croatia. Most of them is still here. You know, why would I go send a sample to the United States, spend the money, and do all that, and you know, in hopes of finding an American relative? They aren't as interested in finding American relatives as Americans might be in finding Croatian relatives.
Right.
You know? And there's also, I think there's costs that are a little higher too, because some of those countries tack on value added taxes to the cost of the test kit, so they have to pay more for them. There are some places with regulations. France is pretty much outlaws paternity testing. So some of the companies won't sell into France because they're afraid of, you know, getting in trouble with the French legal authorities, because these tests could be used for that purpose. So the tests are not always available in those countries. And I mentioned that earlier, that each testing company has a different list of what countries they sell to. And there are, where we can order any of those 5 tests here, depending on what country that you're living in over in Europe, you might only have 1, 2, 3 of them available.
Susan is reminding me that my heritage is Israeli. Yes, they're based in Israel.
Yes.
Thank you. So, yeah, I think that's a good explanation. So, okay. All right. Well, Richard, thank you so much. This has been an excellent program. You've been very informative, and I really do